You're watching Chilly Boy Productions. I'm Larry, Chilly Boy Chilson, and today we are discussing Disney sequels and why they just can't seem to get them quite right. And to help me dissect and discuss this particular topic, I am joined by a couple of friends here from the YouTube film space. First up, we have an animation and Disney connoisseur herself from Rachel's Reviews and the Hallmarkies podcast, Rachel Wagner. Hi, Rachel.
Hi.
Well, it's so nice to have you on here to discuss all things Disney sequels today. And of
Yeah.
course, I am also joined by someone who obviously needs no introduction from me, is much more into the business side of films, sequels, trilogies, how we get franchises started, box office, Mr. Sean Chandler. Hi, Sean.
Woo! Hello, hello, hello.
Well, thank you as well for coming on and talking about some Disney sequels with me today.
Absolutely.
Well, this topic has kind of been fermenting in my brain ever since we got Moana 2 back in November, thinking why Disney struggles with sequels. And then it was cemented this past week when we got Mufasa, The Lion King, which is a prequel, but a follow-up to a very successful live action retelling of The Lion King, critically and commercially. Mufasa is floundering on both fronts. So, what is it about Disney that struggles so hard with getting a sequel formula down? Now, Rachel and I also discussed a few months back when I actually was in Salt Lake City, we were in person. We kind of talked about Pixar and DreamWorks and their sequel success. I don't know if you agree, Sean, but I'd say out of the three, DreamWorks has far and away the highest
Yeah,
success rate when it comes to
right.
creating great sequels.
You look at the last 20 years and who has a bunch of franchises where they kept the quality up. DreamWorks has done that multiple times.
Well, I mean, they're the exception to the rule that most of their sequels are actually superior to the original films.
Part of what we discussed is that they kind of don't always get the formula right on their first go round. So their original films are a lot more hit and miss with DreamWorks animation. However, they seem to be able to lock in on something after that first one and either remedy what they didn't do as well in the first one or just maybe even enhance what they've already done really well when it comes to things like Shrek 2 or How to Train Your Dragon, Kung Fu Panda series. They just have a plethora of really, really good sequels and even thirds and trilogies. Pixar, up and down. They're not bad. They have some very strong sequels, including one this year. I really enjoyed Inside Out 2. Obviously, commercially, Pixar knocks it out of the park when it comes to box office and their sequels because they have these beloved films and they make us wait decades for these movies that we're like pining for. But I think maybe that also leads to them not quite living up to hopes and expectations when it comes to things like Incredibles 2, Finding Dory. We're waiting decades and we're like, oh, that was fine. But commercially, Pixar killing it. Again, Inside Out 2
Yep.
is the biggest movie, live action or animation of 2024. They have dominated.
If Disney were here, they would probably make a similar argument. I mean, Frozen 2 made over $1 billion. Moana 2 is killing it, the box office. Ralph Breaks the Internet nominated for an Oscar. So I think that they might not see it as like the catastrophe that we're kind of framing it as.
Yeah, and then of course we get to the one we're here to talk about, Disney animation, which has had
Mm-hmm.
an interesting journey with sequels, much like Pixar, actually. I mean, I know we had Toy Story 2 pretty early on, but Disney was opposed to sequels. They did not create any sequels to their films for decades. It wasn't until the 90s until we actually started getting Disney animation sequels, and it all kind of kicks off really randomly with Rescuers. getting
Yeah.
a theatrically released sequel. Out of all the films in the Disney filmography, it was Rescuers.
We wanted to go down under. Just needed to go down under. It's
So they actually kind of
Yeah.
start out solid, I'd say, with Rescuers Down Under. I would argue it's better than the first one. A lot of people think it's at least as good as that first one. Hey, you start with not jumping on your big properties and maybe we can get something going. And then it was just a bunch of straight to video sequels for all of the rest of their big 90s properties. Beauty and the Beast, The Lion King, Aladdin. We started getting the retro ones of the Cinderella sequels. In the 2000s, obviously, we started getting things like Fantasia 2000 released to theaters and The Jungle Book 2 in the late 90s. We got Return to Neverland into theaters randomly. And then they did this really weird thing with their straight to video where they went back and just randomly kind of seemingly pick and choose. Like we get Fox and the Hound 2 with Reba McEntire. We
oh
get like
yeah.
Bambi 2
Oh.
Out of the Clear Blue, 101 Dalmatians 2. Just all of these really off the wall retro choices for sequels from Disney, all straight to video. And then they also were sprinkling in their current slate that weren't doing well, like Brother Bear 2. Not really sure who was pining for more Brother Bear, but Disney gave it to
We
us in
got
a
it.
straight-to-video sequel. So there was a long stretch where Disney just wasn't releasing these into theaters at all. They knew that they weren't really great. Some of them better than others, I would argue. I really enjoyed The Lion King too. I also think Lion King 1.5 is quite fun as well. Two that maybe should have been theatrically released rather than something like The Jungle Book 2, but there we were. But then in the 2010s, we started getting these big hits, and when we're talking big hits, it's like mega crazy hits. Back to the Lion King 1990s style hits with Frozen, Tangled got us back up there, Moana became this insane success, Wreck-It Ralph was big, Zootopia hit $1 billion.
Revival. Yeah.
And suddenly they said, well, why don't we start making sequels a lot faster, but putting them into theaters? So we got Frozen 2, which, as Rachel just said, made over $1 billion, became the highest grossing animated film of all time, if depending on whether you include the 2019 Lion King or not, until Inside Out 2 broke that record this year. We had Ralph Breaks the Internet, which did very well. It made $529 million at the worldwide box office. So nothing to sneeze at. And then this year we got Moana 2, which completely blew the first Moana out of the water at both the domestic and international box offices. Currently, as we speak, it's at $790 million worldwide. It broke all Thanksgiving records down the line. It broke many of Frozen 2's records. However, it has not been met with critical acclaim. Moana 2 specifically of those three, very tepid at a 61%. We had an 88% for Ralph Breaks the Internet. However, if you go online, it is very divisive film. That 88% amongst Rotten Tomatoes critics is not indicative of how the general public, I would argue, views Ralph Breaks the Internet. Same thing with Frozen 2. It has a very respectable 77%. Not great reception, I would say, amongst general movie-going fans when it comes to Frozen 2. So, Sean, I guess we could start
Yeah.
that here. How do you feel Disney is currently at with their sequel slate?
You kind of go down the list, and there'll be one that I go, well, that one's. I'm a Frozen 2 fan, and I'm a Ralph Breaks the Internet hater. Every time I watch it, I like it less. Moana 2 was just just fine. Like it didn't do anything offensively bad. It didn't frustrate me the way Ralph Breaks the Internet did, but it also didn't do anything to distinguish itself or stand out. And so it just feels so inconsistent in the quality of what they deliver, whether you'll get and even amongst people, like that just the simple idea that even as you reference these movies, I might be a Frozen 2 defender, Rachel's a Ralph Breaks the Internet defender, like where there's not even like a consistency in it. And I think that's the big difference is that you'll have these beloved original films that everyone's like, yeah, that was really good, that was really cool. And then the sequels opinions are all over the place. And that's not good that they can't figure out that formula on what that is. And I have a theory whenever we want to get to that. Yeah, it's just fascinating that after all this time, put out Moana 2, they're still struggling to figure out how do you recapture the magic.
Yeah, and it's a big bummer because Moana 2 really displayed that they didn't even need to market that thing. I think they spent
Right,
like $10 in the marketing department for Moana 2. It was nowhere to be seen. Wicked was dominating marketing
right.
on, and still kids and families showed up. They found out, well, somehow, I don't know how. They scoured the internet to find out this movie was coming out because Disney wasn't telling you it was coming out, and they showed up in droves. It showed how beloved Moana was. I remember thinking back, every single year they release that like top 10 movies watched on streaming.
Yeah.
And Moana was always on that list. Like even years and years later, Moana was consistently one of the most streamed movies. It kind of baffles me actually in the first place that they decided to go the route of TV miniseries, like little series, rather than straight up sequel in the first place. But that's neither here nor there, I guess.
It's
How
the
do you view
confusion
it?
of Disney over the last 5 years of just
Yeah.
with Disney Plus that there's just so much hindsight's 2020, but it seems like there were just so many ill-advised ideas in how they handled Disney Plus as a strategy. And so you're like, what? This really popular thing? And maybe it's they didn't have the data set to know, wait a minute, Moana is our like top streaming movie. That makes it really obvious that you should do something with it. And they didn't have that data when they first greenlit it, but it just seems like so much mismanagement there of like
Yeah.
Well,
poor.
even part of it, just look at the YouTube views. How many views does How Far I'll Go have or streams on all platforms like that?
Mhm,
You're Welcome also is a billion. It has like 2
mhm.
billion viewed songs.
I think
Ugh.
part of the problem is that their original films in between the sequels are very weak. I think that overall hurts the reputation of Disney. For Pixar, they've had like some decent, they had Lightyear, but they've had like some decent
Yeah.
originals, mixed in there. And so I think that helps, or even with DreamWorks, some of the others. And also, I mean, it does, I think, make a difference that these other studios are really pushing the medium of animation forward in a very like exciting way, and even with their sequels. So when you get Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, which is so bold artistically and story-wise and everything else that it could be, I think that, at least for me, when Disney puts out a meh sequel, where in another phase, if this had happened in like 2006, where like it just wasn't like a lot happening in the world of animation, then it might seem more significant, but
Right.
it feels like such a weak effort in comparison to what the Spider-Verse people are doing, what some of these indie people are doing, some of these, that it's such an exciting time for the medium, that even for sequels, even for franchise films, it's an exciting time. And Disney
Yeah.
is just not stepping up to the plate. And it makes something that's fine just feel fine.
I mean, in particular, like you look at Moana 2, there's just nothing there
Yeah.
that's like fresh or exciting. It's like if you
Yeah.
like Moana, here's more of it. And we spent a bunch of money on it, so the water simulations look fantastic, but they're not interesting. Like we've had
Right.
amazing looking water and animation for 10 years.
Yeah.
And so you're just kind of like, watch it. It's just more of something I have already seen before, that it's good enough, but good enough is not good enough when all these other studios are putting out things that are like so interesting on an animation level that we're talking about all the groundbreaking work everyone else is doing. And the premium studio of the last 85 years
Yeah.
is not. I mean, I think that's a great point as to a big part of the problem. I think on just a conceptual level, to take things in a different direction, so much of what they do and what they're adapting originally to create these stories, they're often not designed to be franchises. When you're making The Lion King and it's sort of Hamlet or whatever, that's a very self-contained story that by the end of it, you're done. It's not obvious what the sequel is. You can tell more stories, but it's not obvious how you capture that whole experience. And you kind of go through some of these other ones where They're self-contained stories. We're adapting Rapunzel. Not that I'm aware of. There's not Rapunzel 2 out there that is equally famous as Rapunzel. And so you just have the one thing. And that's what
Yeah.
so many of these are. And so immediately right there, they're not set up to create franchises where you look at How to Train Your Dragon. That's a series of books. Or inherent to the world of Shrek is we're taking all of these stories and pulling them together, so you can always just run with down any one of these other paths with one of these characters and do a sequel to it. Or even The Incredibles, there's more threats that can show up. There's more you can it's pretty obvious what the sequel is. And then you kind of go, what's kind of a less impressive Pixar sequel, Finding Nemo or Finding Dory. Well, Finding Nemo is not a great foundation for a whole series of stories because he's found at the end. And so
Yeah.
it's like, so inherently, you're just kind of to capture the same vibe, you're just doing the same thing again in a way that you feel the rehash side to it, in a way that some of these Incredibles or How to Train Your Dragon, or even Kung Fu Panda, it's more obvious how where a sequel goes or how you play all of that out. The things that they're trying to do with their originals, you're not trying to set up a franchise to tell a whole set of stories.
The company is built on the bedrock of fairy tales, adapting fairy tales, and even their
Yeah.
newer ones, their princess line, obviously, is kind of still the bread and butter, of
Mhm.
Disney. I mean, you look at Moana, you look at Frozen, their two biggest IPs. I mean, yeah, they still have something like Zootopia and such. The
Mhm.
fairy tale princess. That is what Disney can do that no other studio is touching, is their princess movies by and large. But a fairy tale kind of has its arc that it hits and then it's done. And I definitely
Yeah.
agree. So even their original fairy tales, like Moana, is not based on a book necessarily, but it has this nice arc for Moana as a character, for this world. There, as we saw, there are other stories you could tell, but I definitely agree with that assessment.
That's
I think
true. Like
we,
if you're thinking about it in
yeah.
the live action world, that Maleficent 2 is one of the most insane movies I have seen from Disney. Like it is crazy. I'm not saying it's good. I couldn't recommend it, but I was just like, are they really gonna
Yeah.
they are they really doing that in this movie? Like it was so bizarre and you
Mhm.
just felt like, what? they,
Yeah.
Maybe
they
that
just
bodes
didn't
well
have
for
there was no story left. Like unless you're just gonna retell Sleeping Beauty.
I wonder if that bodes well for Zootopia, though, because it is kind of out of all of these movies they're making sequels out of, it's the most like just it has a big world that we
Yeah.
didn't
Big
get to
world. Yeah.
explore. We didn't get to
Yeah.
see a lot of it actually, and that's kind of one of the
And
things I came out of there wanting. I was like, I want to see the rest of these little burrows and stuff. So maybe Zootopia will buck this trend and be really great.
well, and it's one where, the first one did the buddy cop thing. You don't even have to do that. You can tell a Zootopia story that changes up the formula and the genre a little bit and still have everything that you want, which is these characters that you enjoy exploring this fun world of animals. You can do that a bunch of different ways. That's the sort of context where you're set up for a sequel and it's more obvious what another adventure looks like.
Yeah, because they could just do a different case.
Mhm.
Like I hope that they don't feel the need to be as allegorical in the sequel as they were in the original. That worked, but it
Yeah.
could feel really try hard. And that's part of the problem too, is that Disney is is has been doing the same thing over and over and over and over again in so many movies. You got to have the generational trauma. You've got to have
Yeah.
the villain redeemed. You've got to have the and so like the movies, even if they are technically original, feel like the same thing that we're getting over and over and over again. So then when you literally get a sequel and it's like, okay, we've seen this exact same story over and over again. I mean, Frozen 2, another generational trauma story that like you're just like, okay, we get it, Y'all need to go to therapy, move on.
Yeah, I definitely agree that they have been. I mean, and you can lump Pixar into that as well.
Oh
Pixar, I
yeah.
think, has really been doing that with Disney. They've been in tandem a little bit in
Mhm.
exploring that same theme quite often over the
Like it's
past
so
decade or so.
boring that you can't have like that was one thing again refreshing about Last Wish, but there was an actual bad guy that was
Yeah.
scary.
I mean, I guess that's what's frustrating about Wish itself is they tried to at least give us just a villain, but just
Yeah, but
No.
they even
I
couldn't go
don't.
because originally they were going to have the couple both be villains, the
Yeah.
king and the queen,
Oh.
but they can't do it because they have to make the queen. She gets redeemed. She comes. They just can't do it anymore. It's really really frustrating, and so it just makes all their movies feel the same. That's part of the problem.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like
So
they do something that's like it's interesting, refreshing when they did it 15 years ago, and you go, "Oh, that was a fun spin. Oh,
Yeah.
that's an interesting way to handle this." And then they go, "Aha!" and the
Yeah.
creativity stops, and it's like they keep getting stuck in those patterns. And you can pick any one of these tropes, and we each have the movie where we thought that worked. Like in Kanto, I enjoy Kanto quite a bit, but it does the generational trauma thing. There's no real villain. We have a world of superpowers, but we're battling against our own issues or whatever. Like it's like another one of those things of like, if you keep doing the same story, the movie where it does kind of work, it feels cheapened because you've done it
Yeah.
all the movies where it didn't work.
Yeah. Yeah. In Kanto and Coco, I was just like, okay, that's
Yeah,
it. You've done it.
yeah,
the two Latino stories.
yeah.
We know how to do generational trauma. But I think Disney also lost sight of the fact that, I mean, just speaking on a creative standpoint, part of what made their 90s Renaissance as iconic, as popular, as amazing as it was their villains. The
Yeah.
iconic set of just amazing villain after amazing villain after amazing
Yeah.
villain. Like every single one of their
It's
big,
true.
iconic Renaissance films partially was
Right.
because they had a great villain who got this
Right,
great
Yeah.
musical number. Everybody loved
right.
them, even though they were the
Yeah.
villain.
The
And in
only one I can think of that, like Mulan, the villain isn't that great,
Mulan,
but like,
yeah,
but other than that, I mean, they really are. Even a weaker film, still entertaining, but something like a Hercules, like Zeus is a great villain.
yeah, yeah, Hades. I
Hades,
mean,
yeah,
I guess you could say Zeus is the villain. If you want to go into actual mythology, Zeus is very much does
that,
some very villainous
yeah,
things.
very bad.
But like I said, all those '90s villains, they're great villains, and they also just cut through so much into the popular culture. Like they're like
Yeah,
even in college, 15 years later, there was a guy that had long fingers, and everyone was like, "He's got Javara fingers," which is probably a mean thing to say, but it was like it's just like so
yeah,
much of like you remember like that. You what Gaston eats for breakfast, you remember like the details of Jafar's
yeah,
hands, like
yeah,
all of these, they're so memorable on
yeah.
every detail, whether the songs, these quirks, their behavior, you remember all of it. They just pop.
That's another thing that was refreshing for me personally. I really enjoyed that Moana specifically. I loved how they structured the story to not have that villain. Again, like we said, the tropes work in some of these films, and I think Moana is a great one for no villain. And then it just kind of got done to death to the point where we're
Yeah.
like, okay, I want a villain. I need
Yeah,
a fun villain again, Disney, please.
Just no
yeah,
twist, no redemption, just Gaston is clearly a jerk, and then at the end, he's a jerk, and we kill him.
yeah,
We literally, how many times we throw these guys, the trope was, and at the end, we throw him off of a cliff.
And
yeah.
we don't need the prequel. We don't need Gaston's prequel about
Yeah.
how his
Oh my
mother
gosh,
scarred him and that's how he
Right, right,
became a
right.
they were
misogynist.
gonna do
No.
it. They they had announced it. He was gonna do.
No. No, Disney, stop.
He was a
Uh,
sweet little boy until.
but I think that's what Disney's really struggling with is even though we're talking about Frozen 2 making over $1 billion, Moana 2 is on the cusp, $800 million at this point. Clearly,
Yeah.
very successful, mega hits at the box office, riding off of the hits of Frozen and Moana themselves. But I think you'd be hard pressed, even as successful as they are, both of which passed their original films at the box office, to find people that would consider them like iconic Disney movies. And I think
Yeah.
that's where Disney is really struggling is even when they're successful financially, they're not able to create a single one in their entire filmography of sequels that you
Yeah.
would consider iconic. One of their staple films, a great
Right.
film.
So I'm saying I think the original films also being so weak really matters because we as film goers, we understand that okay, you have to make this movie in order to get fill in the blank movie. That this movie that's more ambitious is paid for by the movie that is, just your generic blockbuster entertainment. We understand that. So the fact that the originals are weak and the sequels aren't connecting or being particularly memorable, it just makes for a tough era.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of the grander picture in all of this. They just haven't had a great run recently. I mean, you have the Encanto in there, but when you had back to back Strange World and Wish, and then now Moana 2, it's like there's just not a lot of creative juice here. There's something's off in the system, whatever that is.
I'm very curious to see what will happen now with Jennifer Lee stepping down, because Disney is a very CEO, is a very leader influenced company. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens now that she's going to be working on Frozen 3 and 4, and she's not going to be leading the animation division anymore. I'm very curious to see, I don't know, what happens next. If we get some new energy
And I guess this
into.
can kind of point to Pixar, but I think they've been a little bit more successful in their quality to sustain it. Like Inside Out 2, mostly people really enjoyed and it did successful. But how long do you think Disney can sustain this? Right now, we saw their upcoming slate. They are very bullish, both Pixar and Disney, very bullish with sequels moving forward. They are pushing forward with franchises being the dominating factor of what they're set to produce over the next 5 to 10 years. How long until it actually catches up? Does Frozen 3 see a huge fall off because of how divided Frozen 2 was? Will Moana 3, which will inevitably happen now, be able to build upon, or will it fall out because people were on Moana 2, so on and so forth? Will even Zootopia 2 see they haven't been great with these sequels, have they? Do we care? Do we want to taint Zootopia? How long do you think until this run of divisive at best sequels catches up to
Well,
them?
I think some of it, my 6 and 10-year-old little girls, they don't have any awareness that Frozen 2 is divisive. They just know there's two Frozen movies in their
Yeah.
brain. It's just that. Like, it's kind of interesting the way that like they were all about Encanto and they've got the dresses and everything, and then I mean, like Wish just came and went and disappeared. Like, and Karis was singing the song out front and then never rewatched. Like, just pretty well disappeared. And it's fascinating the way that they don't have an awareness of that language that is used by us, but at the same time, they latch onto the
Yeah.
ones that have more quality to them. And
How
I
have they
think
responded
that's
to Moana too?
Karis. They really liked the one song,
The like Bat girl?
the disco one. Yeah,
Yeah,
Oh.
the
yeah.
Batwoman.
Yeah, the Batwoman disco song. So she's like, we got it, and Karen's like, I really like that song, but she's not still asking to listen to it in the car, and she'll still be like, can we listen to? We don't talk about Bruno. Like she would do that all the time, and so I just didn't have that staying power. But I don't know. There's so many directions to go with all of this, but I just feels like it's so creatively bankrupt to oh, Wish failed. Well, let's greenlight 7 Frozen movies, Zootopia 2. Let's convert Moana into second movie. That is so creatively bankrupt, and it's not fixing the underlying issues of you're not making great classics again, and you're not marketing them very well. So uh, you're doing the cheapest tactic. Do what worked in the past. That's
It's
what
so,
this feels like to me.
it's so hard to know. It really is. I mean, you look at something like Avatar, and it didn't seem like that there was that much discussion, that much chatter about it, and then it goes
Nope.
become Avatar 2 becomes one of the most successful movies ever made. And you look at like the Despicable Me 4. I mean, that thing almost made $1 billion.
Yep.
And I mean, they can just keep making those movies forever. There's no end. I don't know, like what the box office is just so unpredictable. If they were going to ask me for advice, oh my gosh. I mean, it's so hard to know like what people will go see. I mean, I can't say that people won't go see Frozen 3 and 4, but I do think that as a brand, Disney just kind of gets associated with mediocrity. That's not good for
Mhm.
their overall brand. If any of you watched the Jenny Nicholson Star Wars Hotel video, it's
Yeah.
brilliant.
Yeah.
Um, and it was so good. And she made like
It's
such an
the first wrote
incredible,
review I've ever watched of a hotel, and it
yeah,
happened to be 4 hours long.
yeah, and it was riveting. I mean, I thought it was so good. And she made like such an incredible argument about how many times people will go and have an underwhelming experience, how that kind of all builds up. They don't want to be the Dollar Tree of entertainment, Disney. And that's what it could end up feeling like. That okay, I guess I'll have an okay experience, but not something that I'm gonna, remember. And especially when even their parks are struggling as far as like the guest experience and things like that. I don't know. I think that if I was Bob Iger, I would be concerned, very concerned about that.
When I
Yeah,
think
and it's
Disney
always
Plus
hard.
has exacerbated that, or like so many of these TV shows on Disney Plus, they feel like that, like the dollar store version of that brand.
Yeah,
That they tried to
it's
reinvent
true.
the television model, and they're doing, overly long movies broken up into 6 episodes, and so it feels stretched out but underdeveloped at the same time. And that's all you're clicking on Disney Plus. It's all ties to that Disney brand. And so I think you feel some of that already there. There's just a lot of focus and like, wait a minute, let's step back and get back to what works that needs to happen with Disney. Because I kind of going, man, we struggled. All right, let's do a sequel to every hit movie. Let's just do the most obvious thing that you, that's what all of it feels like, the most obvious thing that you can do to try and drum up some box office. And when the first one out of the gate from that reshuffle, like, all right, Moana 2, you're promoted up to a movie, and it's so mediocre. It's not overtly bad. It's just perfectly mediocre. And that's a that's a big red flag in my mind.
And of course, Disney can just point to this year's box office and their sequels all doing amazingly well and carrying them to be the biggest studio at the box office this year, thanks to literally Inside Out 2, Deadpool and Wolverine, and Moana 2
Yeah,
carrying the studio.
and at the same time, you can go, but also you look at Mufasa. This is a follow-up to what was the highest grossing animated film of all time. We're approaching $2 billion with this thing. And they okay, it made $2 billion. Let's do it again. But they didn't stop to think, why did Lion King do that well? And so then they do a follow-up story, and they wait too long, and there's just I could not get anyone in my house to go to the press screening, and it was like
Yeah,
they were
same.
all embarrassed to tell me no. They're like, I mean, I know it's Lion King, but I don't want to go see that thing. And so it was like a week straight of like, hey, so who wants to go? And they're like, well, I definitely want to see Sonic. And so it got to the day before, and I was like, guys, if you don't want to go, just tell me, because nobody told me no. They just were like trying to like avoid the question, and they didn't look down. It was like weird because
That's really
there's not a
funny.
lot of times where it's so straight. Like, just tell me you don't want to go. And they're like, I don't want to go. I want to go see Sonic. Like, oh, well, you can see both. They're like, yeah, yeah, I know. I only want to see Sonic. I do not want to see Mufasa. And then we went to the press screening, and they gave out public passes, but the line wasn't very long. And then all the critics were allowed to bring 3 guests, and there were like 2 kids in the room. I mean, it's just, and like a lot of the people are parents, and I see them bring their kids all the time. Sometimes our kids will run around the lobby together. There are almost no kids in the room, and it's like they completely misread what the success of Lion King 2019 actually meant, and they tried to do like, oh, we'll just do another one of those, totally misreading the room. Feel it just felt empty, soulless to people, kind of like, what, like, why are you doing this other than the last one made money? And you're seeing that in particular at the domestic box office, where the last one opened at like what, 190 million, and this one's
Yeah,
opening at under 40 million. That's
35.
Joker 2 levels of drop off. Like that is like that level of yikes, what happened?
Yeah,
Yeah.
unfortunately for Disney, they also take up most of this list of billion-dollar movies that have follow-up films that bomb. Like, not even just underperform, bomb. With the
Yeah.
Marvels coming off of Captain Marvel, we have another one in this list of live actions. We have Alice Through the Looking Glass
Yep.
coming off the billion-dollar film of Alice in Wonderland. Now
Yeah.
we have Mufasa off of The Lion King, joining the likes of only like
Hmm.
Joker to Joker 2, and I guess you could argue Aquaman to Aquaman 2
Yeah.
as well, being the other one. Like that's the list of
Okay.
billion-dollar films with bombs following them. So let's use that as the segue into the financial side of these live action films. So, unlike the Disney animated films, the live action side of things can't even point to, well, they're still making money, so who cares that they're getting ravaged by critics or that people are divisive? Some people hate it. They can't point to that. Critics are hating it, general audiences are hating it, and it's making no money. So I mentioned, obviously, Alice Through the Looking Glass was the first one that kicked us off. Absolutely bombed. It made $299.5 million worldwide compared to the first that made over $1 billion. Obviously, we have 102 Dalmatians, which is hard to kind of lump in here. I guess that was the OG live action
Yeah.
sequel. That made 183.6. Then we had Maleficent, Mistress of Evil, that made 492.2 million. Actually, the biggest on this list is that Maleficent sequel. And then now we have Mufasa, which just had an absolutely abysmal $35 million domestic opening, 57% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes. My personal opinion is they don't understand that literally the
Yeah.
only reason the live action remakes are successful is nostalgia. I mean, it is
Right.
quite literally 100% the only reason The Lion King made $1 billion. If you did a
Right.
Beauty and the Beast 2, that one made $1 billion too, it would bomb. The second one would do horrible. Aladdin 2 would bomb. It would do horrible. The only reason your live action remakes make the money they make is because you have tapped into the millennial nostalgia
Yeah.
specifically because it's the Renaissance films that are doing this. You've tapped into our little nostalgia as millennials. A lot of us have kids. We take our kids to go see the
Hmm.
remake of the film we loved growing up. It makes $1 billion. That's it. When you start introducing movies and stories that don't hit our nostalgia button anymore because you're just going off and telling something,
Yeah.
who cares? We don't care.
Right.
We don't show up. Our kids probably didn't love that live action one like we loved the animated one growing up. So they're not, like you said with Mufasa, they're not pushing their parents to say, let's
Yeah.
go watch that one
Yeah.
now.
There are like exceptions in the middle of everything for all of us. So like at my house, the Aladdin live action remake that's been played on loop at different times. But like special memory taking my middle child Chloe to see Beauty and the Beast in the theater. Or I guess she would have been 4 years old or whatever. She put on the dress and everything. She never rewatched that at home.
Right.
Like, ever. I don't know if they've ever watched the live action remake of The Lion King. I don't know if they've ever watched it. I don't know if they would ever want to. They're these very much it's an experience to watch at the theater. Oh, that thing from my childhood. Now I can take my kids. They're the same age I was when I saw it the first time. You can do that. We saw The Little Mermaid a couple times in the theater. They're not watching that version at home. They watched the animated one at home. And so there was something to it in the theater as a community experience. Like I think that kind of missing that it's just nostalgia drives that, and it's not like when they did Dumbo the same year that Aladdin and Lion King hit $1 billion. They do Dumbo from a A-list director dead on arrival because the Dumbo that is a different generation. That is not you're not tapping into the yeah that millennial that Renaissance era magic. That's where the generation works is on that one set of films.
And I would argue that they even tapped into that millennial because we were, early 20s, just out of high school, like late high school, with Alice in Wonderland because it was Tim Burton and Johnny Depp. So even though
Yeah,
Alice in Wonderland, the
right,
film, wasn't in our nostalgia button, the director actor
right.
combo was heavily in our nostalgia button. It
Hmm.
looked crazy. It was back to like Tim Burton being wacky. So we all rushed out to see it for
Well, and
them.
and this was the peak of Johnny Depp. Like
Yeah.
Johnny Depp had a
Yeah.
window of time where he was the biggest actor on the planet, and then Robert Downey Jr. passed him. But that was that window that Pirates just propelled him to this crazy level of success that just we wanted more weird Johnny Depp. And by the time the sequel came out, we'd done that for over a decade. We don't need more weird Johnny Depp face paint or whatever. And it wasn't Burton.
Yeah, do you have anything to weigh in on these live
Yeah, I mean,
action
I
sequels,
agree.
Rachel?
I also I mean, I don't want to get political or anything, but I do think when you're leaning so much into nostalgia and then you try to I don't want to say woke because that's like such a
Well, they
horrible
like
word, but
bash the
like
originals.
when you try to woke your your original films that people love, and then people, so some of those middle America conservative people that were building that nostalgia and were making those movies such big hits, when they turn on you, which a lot of them have done on Disney, then something like The Little Mermaid, which a lot of people thought was like pretty solid for the live
Right.
action remakes, but now the nostalgia doesn't look so good because it's this corporation that's turning everything that I loved into something bad and having to make it better or apologize for it or whatever.
Yeah, I think particularly Mufasa had a lot of things against it. I think they just,
No.
it was an ill-conceived idea from the jump outside of just the nostalgia
Yeah.
bait. I think they didn't understand that most people didn't like that Lion King. Yeah, it made, I think studios lose sight that just because it makes
Right. Look how
$1 billion
much
doesn't
money it
mean
made.
we like it. It just means a lot
Yeah.
of people were curious at least once to go
Yeah.
see what it was about.
They
But
don't have their finger on the pulse. They don't
they didn't
understand like what's the
understand.
actual conversation. They just see
Yeah.
that's a lot of money. Let's do it
Yeah.
again. But there's no finger on the pulse to what people actually felt or why it made so much money. And that makes all the difference. It's just the wacky executives
Yeah.
that just see dollar signs.
Because
I
even
think,
Disney forgets
yeah.
about these live action remakes. That's the amazing thing. They will tell you in their speeches, "Oh, we're making this version for a new generation. This is the new generation's take on whatever it might be." But that's a lie, because if that was for the new generation, then you would see when you go to Disneyland, when you are out, you would see it in the toys and in the branding and the other things like that. You would see this new generation, right, being built up. No, you never see that. That's because they know that these movies are made for nostalgic adults, not for a new generation of kids. And so that's why I'm saying when you lose those nostalgic adults
Right.
and people get fed up with Disney and what they're doing, then it's going to be a problem.
I think even off of that, even more so than just maybe, Ariel there, even with The Lion King, is looking at Mufasa, even from the plot. For you to create a backstory that
Yeah.
inherently then changes the original story. You're making somebody an orphan, you're doing all this other
Right.
random stuff, like giving us a backstory we don't want in the first place, but one furthermore that changes the story I already love and the dynamics in that story. Once you start tinkering with and changing and making all these, oh, we have to explain away all of these things, I think people are just like, no, no, I don't want that.
Right.
Yeah, and
Why are you changing it?
what
Yeah.
kid is interested in a love triangle between Mufasa, Scar,
Oh.
and Sarabi?
Also,
Like,
can I just say that whole
what?
Sarabi thing makes it so much creepier when Scar takes over and like kind of like Sarabi and like calls her down to make her his queen. It makes that now so creepy in my head thanks to this stupid origin story that he
Yeah.
So
turns on a dime
dumb.
over Sarabi.
I mean, I think a lot of what Rachel's saying here, like, is a big part of that problem of you want to do nostalgia, but you want to change it. And as soon as you do that, there's a break. I was never super on board with doing a Mufasa movie, but I watched that trailer and they went, they're not actually brothers. That there's like, wait, what? It just immediately there was like, what are we doing? Like this is this why are we changing this? Why is this and just there's a disconnect there immediately. Snow White's kind of the easy one to pick on because not that this Rachel the actress has made some ill-advised statements, but like when you're adapting Snow White because it is an absolute classic that has stood the test of time, and then you're promoting it as, but we're fixing it. You immediately go, you got to see how there's a disconnect there.
That's what
That
I'm saying.
like
Yeah.
Well, I
there's a
think their big
disconnect.
problem is just the Disney princess line in general. I don't know. That's the I know that really gets under Rachel's skin. Is that has nothing to do with like recasting or trying to make it woke in that sense. It's more of a I don't know, a feminist take type of thing, is they think they're making these characters updated to modern times when really the character in most cases was already
Right.
perfectly
Z-
marked. The
Yeah.
biggest one to me was
Belle is
actually
the one.
Emma with Beauty and the Beast,
Yeah,
already
yeah, yeah,
the most
exactly. Yeah.
headstrong,
Right,
progressive
right.
princess there
Yeah.
was in every
You,
metric was Belle, and
you got
she's
to make
sitting
her
here
an inventor.
talking
Like,
about her like she's this, 1700s damsel who has no
right.
agency over her life when her whole story is agency.
Right,
It's
right.
wild.
Like it's the song from the beginning. She's the one that reads. She goes to save her dad. She
Right?
trades her. Like it's like, what are you talking about?
Jasmine,
And
I do remember
it's
that too. They did it with Jasmine, and it was like Jasmine's a very
like,
headstrong character in the original
She
animated
literally
film.
runs away.
and it's like that sort of thing where it feels like throwing their own movies under the bus that you're also adapting, and there's such a disconnect in there that it's at a certain point in time, when it's especially when it seems like it's getting more and more extreme with the Snow White comments, but it's like they've been doing this for almost a decade now of here's how we're fixing this classic. We know it's a classic because we're going to adapt it and we're counting on it to make $1 billion, but we're also going to fix it because it's broken for some reason.
I mean, the crazy thing is that they just had this Moana 2 be this huge success, and now we're getting a live action Moana next year. I mean, what?
Ooh, and that set photo already has us all
Oh my
worried.
gosh. Like next year is just gonna be brutal. I'm gonna need
I think
therapy. I mean,
honestly,
Moana 2, Lilo and Stitch, and Snow White, it's gonna be rough. And the How to Train Your Dragon.
Well,
no.
well, in the discourse on the internet surrounding all of this, I'm sure will be
Oh
very.
God.
I think
Like,
that's the side to it.
I-
Like, there's obviously the segment of the internet that are just crazy out of their mind and have made a whole business. It was about Brie Larson, and now it's about Rachel Ziegler, and so they're crazy out of their mind. And it's not as if nothing that like there's things they say that have a truth to them, and then they just blow it so far out of the water that it get the actual like you have a valid criticism on this one thing, it gets completely lost. And it's just
man.
1,000 videos
Yeah.
roasting this 23-year-old girl.
I just know for sure if that's the one reason I was okay with Moana 2 still doing numbers, because I know if Moana 2 had underperformed, I would have seen Moana's like shocked face on a million thumbnails with that red arrow pointing downward. And I know we're getting it. We've already, and I've seen Brie Larson on so many of those thumbnails looking angry, looking upset. I've
Yeah.
seen her on a million and one thumbnails, even when she's
It
at
has
home
nothing to do with the
knitting on her
subject. That's
YouTube
just the
channel.
face.
Just yeah, she's over here on her YouTube channel doing something completely innocuous and not noteworthy at all. It's like, oh,
It's
okay.
painful.
And I know we're gonna have that ad nauseum with Rachel Zegler leading up to Snow White, but
Whew.
I need Snow White to bomb because I also needed Mufasa to bomb. I need Disney to start getting the
Yeah.
message loud and clear. And that's the only way it's gonna happen. The only one I think maybe I'm setting myself up. Could be kind of fun as Stitch because he's cute. They at least kept him cute.
Well, the only thing that gives me hope about that movie is that it's directed by the same guy
Yeah.
who did Marcel the Shell with Shoes On, which is a favorite. They're trying to set the expectations so low, like they did with Mermaid, so that when I go in and see it, I'm like, wow, that was better than I expected.
But even in Little Mermaid, that was the thing I ranted to Sean and Leo about leaving the theater was they just couldn't let Ursula be
No,
Ursula fully. Like they just had to
ridiculous.
change her song, because
Well,
God forbid.
the other thing that's very interesting, I think, about these live action remakes is that they have sapped almost all the humor out of almost all of them. Like even Little Mermaid, they took out all jokes, Ursula's jokes, and they have like at the beginning, like the tears of the mermaid, whatever quote at the beginning, and almost all of them without question. I mean, you can't. There's things you can't take out, like Hakuna Matata or a Friend Like Me or whatever, but like for the most part, they've made them as sad and dark as they possibly could.
Well, after Mufasa, maybe I can't blame them because they put Timon and Pumbaa in there and they were horrible. Like that Timon and Pumbaa stuff, I absolutely hated in
Yeah.
Mufasa.
It's just
So,
have this really dramatic scene, hard cut, fart joke.
They were
Nonsense.
Kuna
Back to
Mufasa.
drama.
I said, "Oh my God, somebody grab the cane and pull these two off of my screen. I am so tired of this Timon. Talk about a downgrade. You go
Yeah.
from Nathan Lane to Billy Eichner. It is just woof. This
Yeah, that's
a
fair.
downgrade. Oh, it's
Yeah.
a voice role. Bring back Nathan Lane. I don't understand. He still sounds just fine if you're gonna do this crap.
It's true.
But we'll see what happens with that because what? There's a Jungle Book 2 on the way, right? That's the next
Oh,
sequel
there
that maybe
is?
we're getting. That's what I saw
Oh
online.
no.
There's a Cruella sequel still kind of in the development phase.
I mean, they've
Yeah, I don't think that will
announced-ish so
happen.
many things. I just don't even know what's going to happen, what's not, because there's just so many things
I
just
don't think
that they've
Cruella
said.
2 will happen. The
Well, that
first
one is
movie,
very weird. It did
first one
well.
didn't make that much because of
It
the
made
pandemic.
because of the
Yeah.
pandemic. I think it kind of sat in that weird place. The weird thing about that, and also the weird thing about Wonka, which just got announced a sequel. Wonka is obviously not a straight up villain, so there's that. But he does get much darker. So is the sequel going to start getting old Timothy Chalamet to be a little bit darker in that sequel? Or are we going to still pretend like he's just this joyous optimist? I don't know. But same thing with Cruella. If we go into a sequel we have
It
to
makes
bridge
no
the gap,
sense.
right? We have to
Yeah.
bridge the gap between where she is and where she
Yeah, because
goes.
didn't Roger and Anita get Pongo and Purdy at the end of the movie?
So
So
she
yeah,
gonna want
it
to
makes
kill
no
him. She gonna
sense.
want those puppies to kill. How do we get there?
So
That's what
sad.
the sequel needs to explore.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah, so we'll see. I don't know with these live action sequels. I don't understand how Disney doesn't get the message that we don't care if it's not the nostalgia. And even at this point, I think we're running real thin on nostalgia.
You know
Clearly,
what's
they're also running real thin on movies to
you know what's
remake.
a
So,
shame is I wish they had taken the approach of Once Upon a Time and done that with these live action remakes where they created a whole they had all of those remember berries for things that we remember from the beloved films, but they had told a whole new story. And I almost wish that they had taken more of that approach of like this is gonna like they did with Pete's Dragon. Like Pete's Dragon is an entirely different movie than the original film, like in every way, except for having a dragon and a character named Pete. Other than that, they're completely different. And I wish that they had taken that approach to more of these, and I mean that would have at least been more just interesting.
all right. Well,
But
Sean, do you have any final thoughts on why Disney, whether it's in live action, whether it's in their classic animation, why they're struggling to create memorable, iconic sequels?
Well, I mean, I think the closing thought, the inherent problem, I think, with all of it is that it's an inherently creatively bankrupt model if all you're doing is live action remakes and sequels. If your whole strategy is that thing worked in the past, so let's do a new one. Let's take that thing in the past, let's do it in a new format instead of cutting a new path, instead of telling new stories, instead of digging into what are the old fairy tales that we haven't told yet, and creating this new world. And, they've always adapted these old fairy tales, but they've very much created their own Disney version of it. Instead of doing that, you're just rehashing the past, and that is not how you recruit the best talent, the best storytellers, the visionaries, the people that want to do something really cutting edge with animation. Why would you go to Disney right now? Why wouldn't you call up Lord and Miller? Why wouldn't you call the
yeah,
DreamWorks people?
true.
If you're the cutting edge storyteller that wants to do something different and interesting, Disney's the last place that you would want to go
Yeah.
because they are not breaking new ground and their whole strategy is so overtly copy what worked in the past. Do a sequel, do a remake, even if it's Moana from less than a decade ago. We're gonna we're gonna convert the TV show into a movie. And we're gonna do a live action remake because we are so risk averse. We are so afraid of doing anything interesting and taking a worthwhile risk that we're just doing the safest path possible. When you do that, You're not going to get the best talent. You're not going to recruit the people that actually want to do interesting things. And you look around at animation the last few years, it's not Disney anymore. It's all these other studios. And so I think that's so much at the core of kind of what's happening here is they've chosen a path that is creatively bankrupt in many regards.
Yeah,
And I think I
I
remember that we
agree.
had this discussion when Disney Plus kind of launched, and after a few months of it being there, you look at Disney and you kind of see the big downfall of a company whose entire brand is nostalgia. Like Disney has
Yeah,
kind of created themselves as the nostalgia
right,
brand, and they've just doubled down on it since then.
right.
Like they have
And
not made an effort to get out of that.
in
Yeah,
the last 5 years, what are our billion-dollar Marvel movies? The nostalgia films. It's only the nostalgia films. What is our plan for the next
yeah.
Avengers movie? Let's bring back the old
Oh
Avengers.
my
It's nostalgia.
gosh.
That's what's taken over Marvel.
Well, and they used to be the nostalgia brand, but it was tapping
Is it
into
different? Yeah.
nostalgia, creating
Yes.
something new. Like
Yes.
they would have like the old, westerns that they would make, or Treasure Island, or Swiss Family Robinson, or something like that that had this nostalgia kind of around it. Disneyland in and of itself is like complete nostalgia. They used to be able to make something like fresh and interesting with that nostalgia.
So, do you have any closing thoughts, Rachel, on why they're struggling to make a worthwhile sequel that is a success all the way around?
Uh, I don't know. Again, I like some of these sequels more than most. I really enjoyed Ralph Breaks the Internet. I really enjoyed Frozen 2. Lost in the Woods is forever my anthem. I absolutely love that song. So, it's tough, but I just wish that they I love Disney and I want them to be successful. And it feels like they go through these cycles
Yes.
every 10, 15 years. And I'm like, we're getting to a long stretch here where we haven't had that much quality. We're getting
It's
to a
feeling like the
long
2000s again.
it's time for the cycle to start over again. And we need a new revival, a new renaissance. And I hope they can do it. And like I said, my hope is that with Jennifer Lee stepping down and whoever it is, that maybe they'll get some new energy there. And fingers crossed with that.
Also, Disney, keep Lin-Manuel off of the live action and in the animation because he creates bangers when he's on the animated films. And so far, not great on those live action remakes he's done. We've gotten Scuttlebutt and whatever was on that Lion King Mufasa soundtrack. So
Yeah,
get him back
still
on. We wanted him,
traumatized.
we needed him for Moana 2, not Mufasa. That's just my 2 cents. Thank you both so much for joining me, having this discussion about Disney. I think what Rachel said is true. I think that's why a lot of people defend Disney because we grew up on Disney. We all have this real affinity for Disney as this brand, as this company. We love the idea of Disney. We just need you to live up to that idea again because we're in some rough waters right now. But Rachel, why don't you let people know where they can find you?
Yeah, you can find me at Rachel's Reviews all over the place and also at the Hallmarkies podcast.
Perfect. And Sean.
You can look up Sean Chandler on YouTube. You will either find an NFL player or a guy that looks like me that talks about movies. It is the guy that looks like me that talks about movies.
Perfect. And if you enjoyed this discussion and video, please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below and comment what you think Disney needs to do to create some meaningful, iconic, worthwhile sequels moving forward. I love you all so much for your continued support. Mwah. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.